I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I came up here to drive the summer before COVID, 2019. That was my first time up here. But you know, I really fell in love with Alaska, and I found myself a couple years later in 2021 wanting to come back up here. So I came back up in the summer of 2021 and ended up sticking around. So life in Juneau is not so bad in this small town. To me, it feels like a small town. From the perspective of an Alaskan, this is the third largest city in the state. We have about 30,000 residents here. The greater Fairbanks area has about 90,000, and Anchorage is upwards of 200,000. But we are the capital city here, and have been ever since 1906. The reason the capital was moved here was Juneau had a bunch of gold mines in the late 1800s, early 1900s, had several active gold mines, and because of that influx of money, it was decided to move the capital from Sitka here to Juneau. We are quite unique as capitals go. Even though where we are right now is on the mainland, living in Juneau is pretty much like island life. We're totally cut off from the road systems that connect the rest of North America. So the only other state capital in a similar situation would be that of Hawaii. Also obviously not connected to the roads. But this road we're on right now, as we pass through the roundabout and back behind us, this is the main highway that goes throughout Juneau. And locals will often simply refer to it as the road. It's about 50 miles long, and it dead ends at either point. That's the longest stretch of road that you could drive here in Juneau. So like a lot of the other island communities, we rely on all of our goods, our groceries, Amazon packages. They all get brought up on the barge from Washington, or they're flown in on airplanes. So naturally we do see a somewhat higher cost of living. It's not so bad here in Juneau, but your groceries, depending on where you're coming from, might be anywhere from 10 to 30% more expensive here in Juneau. And if you're like me and you like to do some online shopping, I miss the days of 1-day delivery, 2-day delivery. Living here, it's about 2 weeks on average to get your Amazon package. So there are some trade-offs, but overall it's a gorgeous place. I love having the mountains and the ocean close by and accessible. Coming up on our left here is called Auk Lake. That's A-U-K-E. And there's a thin layer of ice still on it, as you can see, but believe it or not, in the summertime you'll see people swimming, boating, paddleboarding out there on the lake. The word Auk comes from Tlingit. It's a Tlingit term that translates to little lake. So Auk Lake would mean little lake lake. This area of town is called the Mendenhall Valley, which gets its name from the Mendenhall Glacier. And you may have noticed downtown Juneau, back by where your cruise ship is, was built way up onto the hill. But out here in the valley it's a bit more flat, so we have a lot more residential homes out here, stores and shops, and industrial areas. And the reason it's so flat out here in the valley is at one point in time this entire area was covered by what's now the Mendenhall Glacier. So you can picture all the force of the ice flattening everything out. There's an interesting phenomenon that happens called isostatic rebound. And basically you can think of the top layers of the Earth's crust like a sponge. And when the glacier covered this area, it pressed down all those layers, and they're ever so slowly springing back upward. So the ground in Juneau rises at a rate of about 2 inches every year. The ground is actually continuing to rise back up now that the weight of the glacier is gone from these areas. Speaking of the glacier, we can catch one glimpse of it on our drive. It'll be coming up on the left-hand side as soon as we get a clearing through some of these trees in just a few seconds here. If you look out to the left, you can see the Mendenhall out there. And the river we're driving over flows from the glacier and out into the ocean. One interesting thing to consider, especially because you just came from a whale watch, one of the main reasons why we have so much wonderful wildlife in Alaska, the whales, eagles, salmon, can actually be attributed to all the glaciers that we have here. So that river that flows out to the ocean carries a lot of silt. As the glacier is constantly moving, creates a lot of friction on the rocks, and it produces that really fine silt, which will flow out into the river until it reaches the ocean. Glacial silt plays a really important role in a lot of different ecosystems, helping a lot of small marine life, such as the krill and the phytoplankton, to thrive. And of course that works its way up the food chain, attracting salmon and whales, and eagles, which will feed on the large salmon populations. Like virtually all glaciers in the world, pardon the stop here, the Mendenhall is receding, and I believe it's about 99% of all glaciers are receding these days. So I've been here in Juneau for about 3 years, and I've seen a pretty big difference in the glacier in that short amount of time. So it retreats back at a rate of about 2 feet every day, back up toward the Juneau ice field. And speaking of the ice field, there are dozens of glaciers here in the area that come from the ice field, and it sits behind these mountains on our left-hand side, and that's the main reason why we don't have a road that comes to Juneau, because we're pretty much socked in by that ice field. It creates some pretty adverse conditions and makes it pretty much impossible to build a road. Really the only option for us, if we ever were to have a road that connected in, would be to follow the coastline up the Inside Passage all the way up to Skagway. And there has been some talk of doing that, but it would be prohibitively expensive, so I don't think that's going to happen necessarily anytime soon. So this intersection we're at is Mendenhall Loop Road, and if we were to take a right, we would end up at the Juneau International Airport. Now our airport is able to boast that title of international thanks to just a couple of flights that come and go from Canada, small regional flights. But most of our flights are either to Seattle or to Anchorage. And speaking of the airport, this is one of my very favorite stories about Juneau, something that happened right here at the airport. So this takes us back several decades to a sunny spring day. I believe it was in April 1987. And there was a Boeing 737 airplane preparing to take off from the airport here. So it was a business as usual. They got the all clear from air traffic control and it taxied out onto the runway. And we're just starting to pick up speed so they could take off. Now right as the airplane was about to pull up into the air, the co-pilot noticed something up ahead. And it looked like a bald eagle was going to fly directly into the path of their plane. And so both the co-pilot and the pilot, they tensed up and tried to figure out their next move. Fortunately, eagles will do this thing when they feel threatened by a predator. They'll basically just fly straight back to their nest. So this poor eagle probably thought the plane was a much larger bird, and much to their relief, it reversed its course just in time for them to continue taking off. But not a split second later, a small object hit the front glass of the plane and bounced off. And in that very instant, the pilot could have sworn that it was a fish. so the pilot and co-pilot looked at each other, and it dawned on them what must have happened. So that eagle had been clutching a freshly caught salmon, and seeing the airplane coming, it dropped its catch to fly out of the way, and the timing worked out just perfectly that the airplane and the fish actually collided in midair. I'm told that they were issued a citation for fly fishing without a license. But Alaska Airlines, they had a pretty good sense of humor about the whole thing. And they decided, hey, it's not every day that an airplane collides with a fish, so they decided to do something fun with it, and they took that same airplane and they completely repainted it, and they put a massive king salmon from the nose of the plane all the way down to the tail, painted on the side. And they gave this decorative plane a special name. They officially dubbed it the Salmon 30 Salmon. And that was part of Alaska Airlines fleet for many years. It was eventually replaced by the Salmon 30 Salmon 2, and it was in the last year or two that that plane was also decommissioned. And there is still a decorative plane that, in my mind, is the spiritual successor to the Salmon 30 Salmon. It has artwork from a local here in Juneau, who's part of the Tlingit tribe, and so it's various Tlingit symbols on there. I believe it's titled the Salmon People. So Alaska Airlines has a lot of decorative planes and one-off planes that fly in their fleet, but that's one of them that continues on the tradition of the Salmon 30 Salmon. This area we're approaching up ahead is called the Mendenhall Wetlands, and you may have noticed on our way out there were a couple of bald eagles perched on the street lights. It's pretty common driving through this part of town to see a bald eagle. We do have a strong population here in Juneau. And there's a few reasons they love to hang out in this part of town. One is it's close to the wetlands and close to the Gaano Channel out there. And another reason is it's conveniently close to the city dump. And the eagles love to hang out in that area. But pretty magnificent creatures. When they mate, they'll typically mate for life and always return to the same nest. So eagles' nests can become quite large. They've been measured up to 8 feet in diameter and up to 6 feet deep. Female eagles will grow a little bit larger than the males. On the large side, they can have wingspans up to 8 feet, which is about the width of this bus from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Is about the wingspan of an adult bald eagle. And if you ever see a bird that looks like an eagle but doesn't have the white head and tail feathers, you might be seeing a juvenile. They have sort of a light brown coloration to the feathers until they're about 3 to 4 years old. So once again, on our right is the Gaano Channel. And this is the ocean that you're looking at, but you can see it gets quite shallow here in the wetlands. So your cruise ship will not be leaving Juneau this way. You'll be going back out the way you came in. The tides here can be quite dramatic. So here in the channel, between low tide and high tide can be a difference of 24 vertical feet. And the water here on our right separates us from Douglas Island. You can see those houses across the water there. We have one single bridge up ahead called the Juneau-Douglas Bridge that connects us with the island. And there's about 5,000 people who live over there. Originally it was considered a separate community from Juneau. We had the city of Juneau and the city of Douglas. But ever since 1970, Douglas was incorporated into what's now known as the city and the borough of Juneau, which technically covers an area of over 3,000 square miles, making us the second largest city in the United States by area.